Okay, so I'm very pleased to introduce you to the second day of the school. The first session is about advanced process discovery techniques. So you have been exposed yesterday to algorithms like the alpha miner, the inductive miner. So you will see in this session examples that make these algorithms struggle, and then you will see more advanced algorithms to try to deal with this. You already know Giuseppe Carmona. You met him yesterday, right? So let me spend just a couple of words on Adriano and Eric. So Adriano is a very talented former PhD student from the University of Melbourne. He could not be here. I like to mention him because if you want to see like a top thesis in process mining, this is a very good example. So he won the best process mining PhD thesis award at the International Conference in Process Mining last year. So this gives you an idea about what is expected if you are doing hardcore process mining. So it was about mainly algorithmics. Eric is the mastermind behind many process mining algorithms and also process mining software infrastructures, like in particular PROM, but not only that. So I give now the floor to them. Enjoy.
Thanks very much. So welcome, good morning, and happy to see you all here. I hope reception yesterday was interesting and food was good, and you enjoy your first day in the lecture, in the summer school. So what you should expect today, especially in this slot, you should expect different techniques for improving the way or the algorithms that you have seen yesterday in the first day. So, of course, there are plenty of algorithms for process discovery. There are plenty of algorithms that we can present here. We just selected 4 that we believe they are complementary between each other and also bring a bit more added value. So the first thing we actually need to do is to sit and talk, because the story that was delivered yesterday on the discovery, on the inductive miner, on the alpha miner, is not so ideal. So there are situations where you need to go a bit on the engineering part or doing things very differently in order to get a very convincing and high quality process model, okay? So just to chase you a bit, let's start with this event log, which is looks like simple, and actually if we look what the alpha miner or inductive miner will do with this event log, it's kind of telling something to us, okay? So if we look at this, remember the event log is like this. I will not go onto the traces. It's not the purpose. The purpose is that if you look at what alpha miner will do with this, it will get a Petri net that will look like this. It would be a bit cluttered around the medium part. There are places, as it will be indicated here, that receive, let's say, tokens from, let's say, forward transitions. If you look at so actually, the model is complex. There are semantic errors. For instance, there are things that you cannot replay. It can get deadlock and this type of things. But also, if you look at the inductive miner, it will get a perfectly sound model, but on the other hand, which has high fitness. It, of course, by construction, this model, as Sander showed yesterday, has no semantic errors. It's simple, but it has low precision. For instance, here, if you look at this part, you see that you can play AG, okay, and this AG, and then whatever you complete this sequence. It's not, this AG is not possible in the model. So you get more traces than the ones you have observed. Of course, so you get this. So the model has very nice features, but it can accept way more behavior, so it can be less precise than expected. And failing in precision is something that you would like to actually, in some context, is not very acceptable, okay? If you want to actually drill down and perfectly represent the model behavior, the process behavior in a model, maybe you want to cut as much as you can the traces that are additional. This is something that already Bodewine showed yesterday with this behavior that is not observed, but it is in the model. So sometimes, in particular contexts, and especially in process mining, in projects, you would like to cut down the extra behavior. And this is trying to cut down, trying to boost, to optimize precision. So you would see here 4 techniques that try to somehow strike a balance between precision, generalization, and still maintaining or keeping fitness high, okay? So there is no free lunch, okay? That means that typically when you try to optimize those quality metrics, sometimes you don't do very well if you do it jointly, you don't do very well in a specific one, but overall, the Pareto frontier is kind of optimized. And there is one thing, and the other thing is that typically those algorithms are very complex, okay? And if you get a million traces log, most of the algorithms you will see here, well, at least this first theory of regions will not be applicable. But still, you can play tricks and do the compositional approaches on top of these techniques. So please don't evaluate the techniques on the bad parts, but also evaluate them on the goodness they have and they bring. Okay. So let's start with the theory of regions. This is. Have everyone had a coffee this morning? Yes. Okay. Okay. That's good. I will try to be gentle. So what's sorry. What's the general idea of the theory of regions? So you have a log. It's a set of traces, and the idea here is to introduce state information. So you escape from the traces and build like an acceptona automata that will cover those traces. I will show you in the next slide an example of this. So the idea is that you go from here, these traces, you get an automata that accepts the language of the traces, and then you have a state information. What this state is encoding, for instance, that these 2 traces, by replaying them maybe in different order, at the end of the day, when you reach this state, they both fire the same number of events and the same events, okay? So you join here because, for instance, depending on the policy, there are different policies, but you can get the same information depending on what you want to represent. So this is already an abstraction of the traces because the automata you get, it can get a larger portion of traces. But if there are different constructions that are exactly the same. So if you put a tree, no sharing on states, that will be exactly the same language. And why it is important to introduce state information? Because there is a theory which is, let me just go first on how to do this, and then I will explain the theory. So, for instance, if we have this trace set here, I can use, and by the way, there is the paper that explains all the possibilities to get an automata, all of these traces. You will get, actually the automata is called TS, is transition system. You get all the states by simply going through the traces. And of course, look, the second trace observes the same action at the beginning, so you will have the same, and you see there are, so forget about the frequencies, they are not important for this, but you get an automata out of this, or a transition system, how we call it, out of this set of traces, okay? So we have an automata, and when we have an automata, we can look for groups of states. That is what we call regions, okay? So what is remember, we have an automata that accepts the language of the log. What we want to do here is to find homogeneous relations with respect to the arcs. And for make it easy in this automata, imagine that this is an automata representing a log. You have in here, you have the initial state, you have the arcs that represents, we already seen in the previous slide, and for make it easy, every type of arc, every action has the same color, okay? So we look for sets of states on this transition system that has homogeneous relation with respect to the events. And the relations are simple. I want events according to a set of states that only cross, or do not cross, sorry, or only enter or only exit, okay? For instance, let me chase you, okay? So you said you have a coffee, okay? So can you show me sets of states that have homogeneous relation? One set of states that has homogeneous relation? No? I tried, Robin. A yellow one is in there, indeed. I just forgot. So the yellow one has a set of states that has homogeneous relation because the yellow one, which is A, is always entering. The the green one, which is D, is always exiting. And what does it mean, exit? I have all the arcs for this for this color have the source inside and the target outside. Okay? All the arcs for the yellow, they have the source outside and the target inside. And the orange is a funny one because it does not cross. All the arcs are either completely inside or either completely outside. Everyone understands this? Now the algorithm is clear. I go on this transition system that I obtain from the traces, and I look for all these states. Why? Because those states represent places in the Petri net. Okay? Anyone forgot what is a place in a Petri net? I can tell, no problem. Places are those circles that connect transitions. So we are moving from a state-based representation of the behavior into an event-based representation of the behavior, which is a place that mimics states in the represented transition system. So there is a kind of very strong relation between a Petri net and the behavior that the Petri net represents, which might be this automata that I just used. So I'm doing the trick back. I'm getting from the automata a Petri net. And the only thing I need is to find this set of states. So can you find, now that you know, can you find another set of states with homogeneous relations? Can anyone tell? Yeah. Absolutely right. Okay, so this is a state, I don't know, maybe I'm just, well, it's not that one, but this one here that you said is indeed a region, again, because B is not crossing, A is entering, and the rest of events, like, for instance, E is entering. Sorry. So, as I said, regions are places in the corresponding Petri net, and I can simply find them all. And then, not only that, but you know, the relation between the events and the regions tell me what is the flow relation I have to put in the Petri net. If an event enters into the region, it is actually putting a token into that region. So the corresponding transition will have an arc going from this transition to the corresponding place. And if it's exiting, it's actually removing tokens because the region represents the state where the system is. If it's exiting, it's exiting that state. You see? Is it clear? Good. So then we can find all the regions and the corresponding flow relation, and that will be the corresponding Petri net. Okay, so for instance, this is the, sorry, let me go back. If you start from the empty Petri net where you put all the transitions, because you know them, then this Petri net already accepts a lot of language because there are no restrictions. Adding, as you have seen yesterday in Sanders' presentation, adding places restricts behavior. Therefore, I add all the regions that they are somehow cutting all the behavior of this Petri net with the corresponding flow relation. Just one final comment. When you have regions that cover the initial state, which is, let me check, no, it's not this, sorry. When you cover the initial state, then you have a token, as you see here. This is the initial state of the Petri net, when you cover the initial state. Okay, so you can go and find all the arcs and compute the Petri net, okay? Questions that you may have? No, it's never. Yeah? You see, it was not a silly question. It was a very interesting one. So he's asking whether we can have two transitions with the same name. The theory of regions, as I'm presenting here, doesn't cover this situation. So they will try, if you have two arcs with the same, and they will try to find regions that are homogeneous relation with that. But there are extensions where you can apply, and you can look the literature. So let's do this exercise now. Marco, how I am with time? I think I'm fine. Yeah. Okay. So let's. I have problems with this. Yeah, so let's have a look to this particular example. I think it's nice because, of course, constructing all the regions that I need to mine a Petri net might be killing. Why? Because I have to look, when I introduce states in my system, the transition system that arises is linear on the size of the log. That's okay. But then I have to look in this transition system all the possible subsets to check whether they are regions or not. That is exponential, okay? So this algorithm is crazily complex to compute. But you can apply the compositional techniques that drill down the things you want to cover. And this is an example, but there are plenty of them, okay? So for instance, what you can do is you can say, hey, let's find regions that, for instance, have R exiting, okay? Can you tell me a region with, it's a pity because the states are not numbered, but can anyone guess a region where R is exiting and it's actually a region, not just a mere subset of states? Anyone knows? Okay. The initial state, absolutely. So the initial state is a region where R is exiting and the rest do not cross. And because it contains the initial state, the place would have a token. Then you can have this region here where R is entering, SB is exiting, and the rest do not cross. Okay? And you can go on. Any guess? The next region that is adjacent to this one? Sorry, and we are building the Petri net on the fly, okay? So this one here, you see, P is exiting, and the rest, and SB is entering, so that the Petri net should be like this. And then go on, you can find all the regions. Notice that some of them are anti-intuitive. Look at this one, okay? So it's already an art to find an algorithm that finds the right regions. But nicely enough, you get finally the Petri net that you are looking for, which is actually a nice Petri net. Okay, and because I want to have all the transitions in this all the actions in this transition system covered, I realize that there are two transitions that are not appearing, okay, in my Petri net. So I will simply do again the same trick, start from a region that covers them, and then find another Petri net. So you can find different Petri nets that cover the transition, and then you can do Petri net operators to join them all into a single Petri net, okay? So if we consider the initial log, where, for instance, the inductive or they had problems in dealing with, you apply the theory of regions, then you will get something that looks like this, which is quite interesting. So before finishing and giving the floor to Eric, some comments to this. When you apply the theory of regions, you get the minimal language containment property, meaning that the Petri net you get is the most precise Petri net you can get. Okay? So this is a very nice property because we don't look for all the sets of states, but actually we look for minimal sets of states, and this minimal set of states are enough to guarantee that the Petri net is as tight in behavior as possible while keeping all the traces that you have seen. So it guarantees fitness, perfect fitness, and the best precision you can get without label splitting, with splitting labels. Okay? So this is a very nice approach. It's very complex, and you can go through the literature to look for how this has been applied in process mining. And there are many papers that are interesting, but of course, the main pain point of this approach is that you cannot apply it on the large. Okay? Questions you may have? Yes? Yeah, it plays a role because if you can minimize the automata while keep preserving the language, that will have an impact into the Petri net. No. If you can minimize it, it is better. But on quality, it will retain the same behavior. Any other question? You see, I'm struggling with this thing. But now I have a break, so I can put it right. So I give the floor to Eric.
Thank you, Josep. Let's not move that too much. Okay, so the next part is on the ILP miner, and like Josep talked about the state-based regions, the ILP miner used language-based regions. It's basically, forget about the transition system that Josep put in between. We will do this directly on the traces in the log. And to find places, instead of using the transition system, we will use ILPs. So that's why this is called the ILP miner, and the ILP, I hope you know.
Sorry?
I don't know, you.
Sorry.
Anything wrong? Don't guess. Like this? Okay, that sounds better. Is anybody familiar with the term ILP, the interlinear programming? That I hope it is. That's we will see. Okay, so we had this log with 100 traces, and Josep also already showed that using the state-based regions you can find a nice Petri net out of that. This is what you get when you use the ILP miner. It's slightly more complex, and I will also explain why it's slightly more complex. So, yeah, let's go. So, yesterday we've seen the directly follows graph and the relations in this graph. So here and on the left, that one, you will see these directly follow the relations in the directly follows graph. So this is what's in this log. For instance, we have the relation from C to F, so C can be directly followed by F, but not the other way around. And we will use these pairs to find places. So we don't use the states like Josep did, but we will use this footprint to find places. So for instance, if we start with the CF pair, then we start with this. So we have the C transition, we have the F transition, and we kind of assume now that there is a place in between. Because there seems to be some kind of causality between C and F, so we assume assume the place is there. But on some traces, the place does not get empty. If we replay this, using the techniques mentioned yesterday, for instance, in the first trace, we only do a C, we never do an F. So the place does not become empty, and that's something that we would really want. And in other cases, C never fires, but F does. So the place, F could not fire here, so we need something else. So we kind of need to extend the transitions that surround this place to make it work for all of these traces that you see on the right. And for this, we will use an ILP. So we make it, for every place, we create an ILP to look for a place with all the surrounding transitions that works. And such a place we will add to the Petri net. To do this, we introduce two variables for every activity X. So like C is an activity, and we see here that the variable from C is 1. So, not that one, that one. from C is 1, and that indicates there's an edge or an arc from C to the place. In a similar way, 2F is also 1, indicating that there is an edge from the place to F. And then for all other activities, there could be an arc, there could not be an arc. We have to check on this. And the number of initial tokens in the place will be 0. And then we are looking for constraints on these variables. And now consider, for example, that we're looking at this trace, the first trace, A, B, C, G, E, H. Then one of the constraints that we could think of is the bottom one. So we want the place to be empty if we have replayed it all. So we want that if we sum over all the from variables and subtract all the two edges, we want everything to be 0. So every token that has produced has been consumed again. And if we now look at the prefix of this trace, and that is the prefix where A, B, and C have already fired, and G is firing, then when G is firing, we know that the place should not be negative. Whatever happens, the place may never be negative. It may become 0 by the firing of G, but it may not become negative. And from this we get the following constraints. So the tokens put into the place, if we subtract from that the tokens consumed at that point in time, so that includes G, but G has not fired yet, so it has not produced anything yet, so that's why G is excluded on the other side. That should be at least 0. So that's another constraint that we can put in the ILP. And if we do that, and we feed that to an LP solver, then we get the following solution. So we have seen that the from C was set to 1 and the 2F was set to 1, but we also get an arc from D into the place, an arc from F into the place, and an arc to G. So note that F now has a bidirectional arc, so it's both consuming and producing from this place. And this is just one place, of course. So, but there may be more solutions to this LP. For instance, we could, if we can now go back, you see that I'm replacing G by H here. This is also a solution, because we have everywhere G, we have also everywhere H, so we could also add this instead. The reason that this one is not chosen is that it is not optimal. So the ILP comes with an optimality constraint, let's say, and that minimizes the number of tokens over all the prefixes. That's an elaborate term. How you could see this is that in every trace, H comes later than G. So G is the first who could remove the token, and therefore it has a better weight in this minimization constraint than H. So if you would have a situation where sometimes H would be first and sometimes G would be first, then it's not that obvious to see, but the ILP solver will solve that, and if they both have the same weight, it will just choose. This we need to do for all these pairs of causality constraints, these like CF, for everything in the footprint. And then in the end we get the net that I showed earlier. So this is, for example, this place in the middle is the place that we just found with the bidirectional arcs from F. And we can also denote for all the other places from which pairs in the footprint this was found. So this is an interesting one, the one in the middle. So for those who are familiar with Petri nets, this place is redundant in the net. So if you would add all the input arcs from this place over here and the place over there, and you do the same with the output arc, you would get this place. So the place is really redundant. The reason the ILP miner finds this place because there's an EC pair in there. So E is sometimes followed by C, but not the other way around. So it assumes there is a causality between E and C, while in fact it's not there. And for that reason, it finds the redundant place. So it would be safe, completely safe to remove this entire place from the net. Of course, there are techniques for doing that. But we have left it in here to show that this is also possible. And then for all the others. And that's basically how in a nutshell, how the language-based region miner, the ALP miner works. Any questions on this? No, then I give the floor back to Giuseppe.
Let's turn up. Can you hear me? No, very good. So, third miner now about completely changing the idea. So, in both presentations so far, we were looking for structures, either in the state space or optimizing relations with an ILP solver. Now we are moving to something very close to what you have seen in terms of purpose and setting, which is the split miner. It's very close and kind of a different way to solve the same problem as the inductive miner. The idea is to try to find a BPMN model out of a log. So you go through DFG as the inductive miner does, but the way it applies and the steps it applies is completely different. So here you will see kind of an engineering approach to mine BPMN models out of an event log, which is quite interesting to see. Okay, so this split miner has 6 steps. So as usual, it starts from generating from the event log the DFG graph and trying to find loops on this DFG, okay, on this log first. So loops means, for instance, short or self loops. Short loops would be, for instance, you see in the event log BCB, or self loops will be you see in the log AAAA. This type of logs, you take them and you treat them differently, okay? But this is something that you do in the log, and then you take notes, and then you will use it somewhere in any of these 6 steps, okay? So, again, you start from the same event log we are using, and then first thing you do, you generate the DFG. As you can see, this is a DFG we have seen, we start to see now, and typically, for the first step after taking note of all the loops, in this case, you can see that there are no in the event log. Let me go back. There are no loops, so there is no short loops nor self loops. So this means that there are no loops in this behavior. You first find concurrency, and this is very important part because you can see that there are several arcs here that represents kind of loops, short loops, but actually they should be addressed as concurrency. And for this technique for assessing that these short loops are actually concurrency, they have to satisfy 4 conditions. So for each pair of activities where you have a short loop, in order to simply say, okay, this is not a loop, this is just concurrency, you have to assess these 4 conditions. There is an edge from B to C, an edge from C to B. They are not a short loop, so you in the first step, remember, we go through the traces and say whether, there is BCB or CBC. But it was not the case, so condition 3 is also satisfied for any of those. And then you ask for a similarity on the frequencies, because we shouldn't forget the frequencies between the relations. If we have one is 100 and the other is 230, maybe it's not actually there is some kind of bias on the relation, so you cannot. Then you ask something, you ask the opposite. When you want to find concurrency, you want to find frequencies that are similar. Okay, and this formula is a simpler formula to check whether edge frequencies are similar. Okay, you can look at the paper, but at the chapter. But the idea is that the larger the epsilon is, the more distance you accept for the similarities on the frequencies, okay? So if you, in this step, you will simply relegate that if you use epsilon 0.25, all these edges are representing concurrency, so you want to skip them because you don't want to have relations that are kind of fake. Okay, is it clear, this part? Yes. So you get into a simpler model, okay? And that is nice because one of the main features of this approach is that they want to get simpler, well-structured, which has a very good balance between fitness and, between generalization and precision. So this is a good step, good moment to start with. So those are the concurrency relations that I have found because we simply relegate. And we will use these concurrency relations later on in the splits discovery approach, okay? So the third, now we have a DFG that is kind of clean. All the concurrency is taken out. That simplifies the structure of the process. And now you want to filter a bit more. The filtering is some very strategic part of this approach, which tries to again remove arcs that are actually close to something that should be noise. Okay, and for that they have three conditions again. So the filtering rationale is that each node should be in a path from the start and to the sink. For each node, its path from source to sink must have maximum, at least one must have maximum capacity. And capacity here, for every path from source to sink, capacity is the edge with least frequency. Okay. So, for instance, the capacity for, let me show, for this path, let me just, because this, okay, this path that goes this, and this path here is 20, is the edge with least capacity. The capacity of this path going here is 10, okay? So, is the edge that impose, in terms of observation, most constraints, okay, most restrictions, okay. So the idea and the third step, the third condition, is the number of edges must be minimal. So I skip because in the algorithm there is a lot of engineering on this part, but once you apply these conditions on all the nodes, what you get is a simpler node that simply removes these two edges that they don't satisfy this filtering, okay? So the filtering is actually making something which is removing some edges that are kind of good candidates to be relegated, be assessed as noise, okay? So you are getting into something that is, again, simpler, okay? And now a big turn, okay? So we have done all the stuff we need to do with DFGs. Now we can move into a BPMN, okay? And the natural way of simply doing it is finding a graph that is isomorphic to this, but now it has the BPMN semantics. So we go from this to this, and of course this graph is far from being sound, from being replayable and so on, because it lacks all the gateways we need for incorporating the semantics of BPMN. So you see no gateways, because this is the starting point. Clear? Yeah, go. No, because we simply no, not anymore. So that's also important. So we now are turning something which is continuous with our frequencies mattering to something which is discrete, which is now the BPMN without these frequencies. At this point, we use all the frequencies we need, and now we forget about them, okay? So it's a huge transformation in this, and huge information lost, but it is acceptable and it's at this moment. Any other question? So, and now we enter into the stage of finding splits and join. Remember, BPMN, you should at this point in time remember what is a BPMN. It's a model that has two types of nodes, activities, but also gateways. Gateways govern the semantics of the model, meaning that if I put a cross, meaning that what I will find next is a decision between the subsequent activities. If I put a plus, that means that the subsequent part of the graph would be concurrent. Do you remember that? Okay? There will be an extra gateway today that I think you have not seen, which is the OR gateway, which is something in the middle, and it's more permissive. But it will play a role in this algorithm. Okay? So, good. So we have this graph, which is, of course, not what we want. We want something with can replay exactly the initial log. This doesn't. So we remember the concurrency relations that we found, and we move, let's say, left to right. For every, let's say, fork, so you have a transition that forks into 3, and these 3 have concurrency relations between them, they are good candidate for what? Can anyone tell me? For a gateway. And which type of gateway? Exclusive. That was the other, so the positive, the AND gateway, the parallel gateway. So in here, it's not so simple as I said. So you have 3 activities, B, C, and D, that are after A. They can be concurrent, but we need to we need to verify that on what we had. For instance, B is concurrent with, actually I have this here. B is concurrent with C, B is concurrent with D, but between C and D, there is no relation, okay? But B is concurrent with them both, okay? So what I can do actually is to put simply a parallel gateway between B and the couple C and D, and because the relation between them is not parallel, I can put an exclusive gateway, okay? This is what they do all over the graph. They move left to right, finding out these cases that are candidates for introducing split gateways, and they perform like I said. There is another case. Can you tell me which case I need to also cover in the graph on the right? Which is the other case which is similar to this one? EF, indeed. So if I look at EF, they are not concurrent, so I put an exclusive gateway. Okay? So common sense way of acting here. Okay? So that is it. I have all the splits I need, but of course, the model is less nasty, but it's still nasty. I need to sort them out. Every split should have a join. So I need to discover a join now. Okay? So how to do that? You move a bit on something which is called, let me just do this. You try to find, that is the tricky part. So again, let's use all the coffee you have in your body yet. So we find subgraphs on the model that can be candidates to close the split, okay? And there are many subgraphs that we can look, but we are particularly interested in a given subgraph which is called single entry, single exit subgraph. They call it SESE, okay? And the SESEs are very interesting because they can be candidate structures to close the splits that you opened before, okay? You see? So in here, I will show you a SESE. And a SESE would be like this. Let me just show you. This is a SESE because this is the single entry and this is the single exit, okay? And of course, because I'm using subgraph theory, I can find the SESEs. But again, Tarjan in the 70s, a very well-known computer scientist, found algorithms to find SESEs. They were very nice, but actually you don't need that. There is, Artem Polibiliani thesis, there is ways to find what is called RPST, Refined Process Structure Tree, I think it's called, and you can find all the SESEs of a given model. And it's a linear algorithm. So you can find all the SESEs, navigate through them, and actually you don't need them all. You only need to find SESEs inside out. Because this is the way, if you think a bit, this is the way you will act. You will go from the inside, the more inside SESEs, solve the problem and move outwards. You see? In here, we are actually doing that. This is the innermost SESE, and then I find that I look especially, of course, if when I was finding splits, I was looking the joints that were, having success for. I now look for the two nodes that have predecessors, which is this and this, okay? And the SESE that covers G is this one that I'm showing. So the last bit of information you need is, okay, I detected a SESE that closes a split, that's fine, but now I have to decide which type of join gateway I put. And there are two decisions here. I will take, okay, if the SESE that I'm covering, all the gateways are of the same type, then I will put that type, okay? If everything in my SESE are XORs, I put an XOR. If everything in my SESE are ANDs, I put an AND, a parallel gateway. But if it's heterogeneous, you use a trick, and this is a very interesting and elegant solution. There is, in BPMN, there are gateways that can be AND, XOR, or OR. Those are, you will see now the sign, they are like circles. And they are more flexible, so they accept all the inputs or as any subset of the inputs. So the semantics is more, let's say, relaxed. So they can accept that the joins all are exercises or just one or few, okay? So when it is heterogeneous, you will put the OR, which is not nice because people can tend to not understand very much the semantics. There are even papers on the semantics of OR joins. But anyway, you can use that to make the model replay all the traces. Okay? So in this case, this is homogeneous, so I will put the XOR join. What is the next SESE? An exercise for you. XOR, but it's not a SESE because what is the single entry exit? Yeah, so in a way, I need to sort out this H. Yeah, so we need to decide which SESE contains H and is a SESE. Can anyone tell me? So this is the SESE that covers. Actually, it's almost everything, okay? This is the only SESE that has a single entry and a single exit, okay? And again, this is something that you can compute once and then you do all the search. And then in here, this is a nasty SESE because it has an heterogeneous form. Because in here, it's a bit hidden. This is a plus and it contains XORs. So it's an heterogeneous. So in this case, I need to sort out actually two gateways. The one here and the one here. So I have to introduce two. So I typically introduce these two, and because it's heterogeneous, it is actually OR gateways. Okay, those are the type of gateways. And I said this OR gateway here. Let me see. It's too high for me. I can either execute this F and it will go, or I can execute this part and it will go, or I can execute both and it will go, okay? So it's kind of more flexible, okay? So now at this point, if you go back to the event log at the beginning, you will see that this actually model is kind of able to replay everything, okay? Questions you may have? Yes, go ahead. Yeah? So if C and D, they don't have the relation about the parallel, why you put them in conflict? Why you just choose inclusive? Because we are optimizing, we are trying to put as much exclusive as possible instead of inclusive. So inclusive is more relaxed. It will give more behavior. So fitness would be okay for fitness because it will not impact on fitness, but it would impact on precision. So Yeah, I understand. I understand. That is a fair comment, but actually, when you decide to put, if C and D were on a relation, then they will not be assessed as concurrent, or they will not have this double pair. If C and D was in sequence, then you will not have this discussion, as it happens between A and B or between A and C. So when this arises, they naturally pop up as relations. So you don't have to deal with this problem at that case. Yeah. I think it doesn't matter, because they will naturally be connected. It would be an XOR that you simply, you turn back to the place you be, and it's still a SESE. So SESEs are unaffected by that. Okay.
No, but I mean when you start not having SESEs anymore, like you have OR joins with loops. So you try to confine loops.
I think so. I think so. I think so. Actually, this is an approach by Adriano, who is the third presenter. So I'm presenting on his regard. So I think you have to read the chapter, but also the papers, and as Marco said about the thesis, it's very involving, and we are oversimplifying it here to make it tutorial style. Yeah. Yeah, this way. You go left to right, let's say, and for every branching, as you have here, A, then B, C, D, you need to introduce, because you want to get rid of this graph structure where from A you go straight to so you want to put a gateway, yeah. You mean between B and C? No. This is just a drawing, okay? But the important thing is that the start event is here. So this means that you first execute A, then B, and C, and D, and so on. So you mean the traces? You want to see the traces? Let me go back. Here, sorry. So maybe we can take offline, because otherwise we are a bit ahead of time. But we can discuss afterwards, because I think it's, as I said, I'm oversimplifying, so there are details that I might be missing that are important. But please have a look at the chapter, and because otherwise we will not be able to sort it out. So, okay, we have introduced a lot of splits, and then we look for SESEs to introduce the joins, and that gives us the final model, which we want to kind of correct, trying to get rid of as much OR joins as possible, because they have this nasty consequence that they accept too much behavior while maybe it's not needed. So what you do for each one of the OR joins, at the end, you try to answer the following question. Can we replace this with an XOR and an AND? Notice that this is kind of counterintuitive, because how do I decide this thing? So I need to go to the log, maybe. So a naive way of solving this problem is I go to the log, I change this with an AND or with an XOR, and then see whether I can replay the traces still. Okay? So I can do this. But of course, they don't do like this. It's an evolution of what I said, but actually, bottom line, you need to do that in order to be sure that you are not destroying the model. Okay? So you do this, and unfortunately, for this model, you cannot do anything. So you have to skip. So the answer for these two questions is no, you cannot do it. Okay? So then you get this process model, and again, maybe it's nice that you, as an exercise, go to the process, to the event log. You see you can replay all the traces on here. Okay. Questions?
The complex gate and set some rules for that.
Yeah.
Even some special process, we do a variety kind of the rest of the process.
Yeah, of course, of course. That will be an evolution, an engineering
It's
evolution.
kind of a standard.
Yeah, you can do. But of course, the basic algorithm works like this, but then you can apply techniques on top of that to improve the way you want, or to make it more complex, but more aligned with the others, of course.
In the final, come back to slide before, please.
This one? Sorry.
No. Furious one, I guess. Furious. Okay. In this case, I have the question about if we follow C's in these cases, that means if we just replace the inclusive gateway, these two inclusive gateway just the end of the H, and we just put another inclusive gateway under the parallel gateway, it's feasible with this situation?
So you mean you would substitute this one with an exclusive?
No, I mean, that means the beginning of the C's is just the B, and then we meet the inclusive gateway EF.
Exclusive, it's exclusive, this one.
Inclusive, and then we'll meet G and H.
Yeah.
After H, we just put another inclusive gateway and a parallel gateway, and then this model will be balanced for the different
That's a good comment, but look, we are, of course, human creativity is good, so you can apply techniques to, let's say, reshape the model you want while still being. So I'm not saying that this is the best model. Okay. What I'm saying is that this algorithm gets this model, and there is a very good compromise between the, let's say, the complexity of the techniques and the model you get. Of course, you can go wild and look for different, let's say, heuristics to reshuffle the model to look for a better model, which maybe would be a way to avoid OR gateways.
Okay.
But the point here is that we are talking from an automatic algorithm, and every time you decide, okay, but we can do it better, you have to think on the correspondence, on checking that out, so that it's always a solution for the problem you are solving. So here, the algorithm is trying to be a solution, very, very effective one.
Yes, thank you for this explanation. But the problem maybe is if we use some open source for that means created the BPM and processes, and then if we didn't use that means to double with the different gateway, and then we'll be meet the semantic errors if we just want to execute these processes. So
okay.
I'm just wondering about this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we move, because I think. So as a summary, because this is not ideal, although it got quite some questions, it's a good balance between, of course, these are the slides from Adriano, who is very positive about the algorithm. So it's a very good balance between fitness and precision. It has a high F-score, meaning that it's a good compromise, not only optimizing individually, but also it's a good job on optimizing them jointly. It gets simple models. They are so it is not guaranteed to be totally structured. So you don't have this guarantee. It has a very fast discovery times, and it gets deadlock-free models. Unfortunately, it cannot guarantee sound models. This is something you cannot guarantee. It requires input parameters. I would say this is something that most of the algorithms need. Some of them you have to play tricks on there. Some of them you can accept the default parameters and they will do nice. And it always applies filtering, even though if it's not needed. It always find a way to look for some edges to cut, and sometimes maybe it's not needed. So of course, there are ways to save these things, but actually this model this algorithm is kind of a good compromise. And of course, there is, I will go very fast to the way you can access this algorithm in Apromore. So if you, there is an academic alliance for Apromore, so you can go and load your event log. For instance, in this event log here, you can load this event log, which is completely sequential, so there is almost no concurrency in there. This is the DFG that you will get. So this DFG, as you can see, it's kind of nice already, but you can turn this event log into a BPMN model that will be like this. And you can also play with the parallelism to try to find this parallelism. Actually, as I said, this event log is totally sequential, so you will not get much of this, including concurrency. You can go to another event log that is more well known, which is the BPI Challenge 12, and you can get this process model straight away, which is kind of interesting because this is a very nice representation of the event log. So actually, what it shows this short demo is that it can do a very nice job for large event logs. Okay, and I give the floor to.
Yeah. Thank you, Joseph. So now we've seen two algorithms that can produce Petri nets, one algorithm that can produce BPMN models. These are all imperative models, and as Marco has explained yesterday, there is also a bunch of models that are called declarative models. So to finish off this presentation, we would like to introduce one declarative miner, or sometimes also seen as an event log visualizer, which is called the log skeletons. We will use the same example event log. This is the log skeleton that we will get in the end. So it's, as Marco explained yesterday, it's declarative. I will walk you through the model. So we will first start with the nodes which are in the model. For instance, we have the start of a case. There's also the end of the case. And the others are the regular activities, and it can also be seen that A occurred 100 times in the entire event log. C occurred only 50 times. And H occurred exactly 1 time in every trace, so that would be a unary constraint in the declarative model, where you would have the 1 on top. So this one has to occur exactly once. No? Do I have the point now too? Okay. Okay. E occurred at least 0 times in the trace, so it may be skipped. It occurred at most. Yeah, that's. Yeah? Okay, yeah. G occurred equally often as A. So this is something that's not in the declarative models, usually. The log skeletons, they... Okay. Well, do I have to... Okay, this is... G occurs equally often in a trace as A. So this is typically not found in declarative models. This is a kind of an equivalence relation on the activities, which is also shown by the same background color. So if the nodes have the same background color, in every trace they occur equally often. So for the Petri net-minded people, if this occurs, you're looking for a marked graph of sorts. So activities that always occur in the same frequency in a trace. But it would be nice if you want to make a Petri net out of this, then that might help. So for the edges, so we have a couple of different edges. I'm not using the same notation as declare does. The reason is that I want to avoid having two edges between the different nodes. So the arc here indicated is the response edge. So that's a response from A to B. So A is always responded by B. If you see an A, it will be followed by B. The other edge, the other arrowhead, is the precedence. So B is always preceded by A. So I'm using only a single edge to do both instead of having the dot on one end and the arrow somewhere just to indicate that it is a precedence or a response. The open arrowheads, there's a never included in there. So A is never preceded by D. That's the interpretation of this arrowhead over there. In a similar fashion, H is never followed by D. So this also implies a kind of an order. If A is never preceded by D and A and D occur, you know that D occurs later in the process. That might help in some cases. And this is the not coexistence or the not co-occurrence relations for both. So C and D do not co-occur. Apparently there's a kind of a choice here between C and D. B seems to be concurrent because there's no relation at all between between B and C, and of course we have seen that in the previous examples that it was indeed the case. So there's a kind of a strange construct in this log skeleton. So here we see that F does not co-occur with E. So F and E, there's a choice. But F is always followed by G, and E can be concurrent with G. So there's a kind of this is a problematic construct typically for Petri nets and imperative models because concurrency and choice are now getting mixed in this model. And using these arcs and this model, we can nicely show that this is the case. What I'm not showing here is a lot of other relations. So yesterday Marco talked about reductions, that you can reduce some of the constraints by other constraints. What is being done here, and I will explain that in the remainder of the presentation, is that I'm using a kind of transitive reduction on many of the constraints. For instance, here we see that A is always followed by the start is always followed by A, and A is always followed by B. Then implicitly, the start is always followed by B, but this is not shown. So, and to get rid of that clutter, I want to explain how that works in the back. So behind the scenes. So we have these 5 relations that we have now seen. So the response, that's the R, or always followed by. We have the precedence, the never followed by, the never, we have seen that. If we put this into a big table for all the activities, we get this. So for example, if we look at this cell, that indicates that E is always preceded by A, and it is never responded by A. So somehow AE becomes later. That's the intuition here. And now we want to only have a look at the relevant activities, the ones that are not redundant. So we'll go strip out all the redundant relations here. There are 2 ways of doing that. So if we look over here, for instance, for the response, if A is responded by B and B is responded by C, then the fact that A is responded by C is not relevant. That's clear. So you can deduce that. If you look at the picture, you will see that. So we can just remove them. In a similar fashion, if A and B do not co-occur, so there's a choice between A and B, and if C is always preceded by A, then you know that C and B can also not co-occur. Because if C occurs, then A occurs, and then B cannot occur. So this is another way to get rid of some of the not occurrence relations that you have in the graph. I'm using the precedence relation here. instead of the response. You could also use a response. Does anybody have any idea why I would like to use the precedence over the response here? There is an idea behind this. And that is a bit from the, it's a bit from the imperative world. So by using the precedence, the fact that they are not concurrent, there is a not occurrence, moves to the front of the process. And that's why you make the decision whether to do A or B. So if I would use the response, it would move to the back, and then that would kind of be out of place over there. So that's the reason for using the precedence over here. If we then remove all these relations from the table, it gets cleared up a bit. So this is approximately what we want to show in this graph. But we can do some more. So first we want to select the edges. So and this the edge, an edge will be added to the log skeleton if either AB or BA is relevant or both. And we will see an example here. For example, that C is responded by G and D is responded by G, but the other way around, there's no relation. So there's no relation that can be found from G to C, or from G to D. But because the edge will be selected anyway because there's a relation from C to G, the relation from G to C will also be shown, and we will get that from the previous table. So that's inserted back here. And then if we will use these symbols for the response to precedence, etc., and if we assume, where is the button? That the response and the precedence and the not co-occurrence are dominant over the not precedence and the not response, then we will get the table on the right, which in the end results in this log skeleton. And now we can, so yesterday Marco also talked about these confidence metrics that he used. And what we can do is we can add noise to this log skeleton by using the event-based confidence. So if you have an event-based confidence of 95%, then you could argue that would be a noise level of 5%. So in this case, all these precedence relations and response relations, you can use this event-based confidence for the noise. So you can just, it's a bit of bookkeeping. You have to count how many times A was indeed directly followed by B, but you can do that. For the equivalence relation, that's more elaborate. Basically, this is a kind of a string distance between the number of times it occurs in every trace. But you can do a thing like this as well. So and then if we allow for 20% noise, then the required event-based confidence would be at least 80%. You would get a log skeleton like this. So here, for instance, you see that 80% of the instances of B is never preceded by C. Or that 80% of the instances of D do not co-occur with F. And that was the part on the log skeleton. So, any questions for me or for Joseph? Yeah.
One small question. Is the representation required to be a fully connected graph, or can it be like disconnected as well?
It can be disconnected.
Okay.
But now, by definition, everything is preceded by the start, and everything is followed by the end.
Okay.
So, by definition, you cannot have unconnected parts, because these edges will always be there.
Okay. No, I was just wondering, like the clear can be disconnected, but this one not then.
That's probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can there also be a parallel relation between the two activities?
Yeah, then there is no edge shown.
Okay.
So if there is no edge shown between two activities, then it is typically in parallel. So for instance here, let's see whether we can find an example here. Do we see?
C and H?
E with, no, that E is about connected to everything else, except A, but there's a transitive relation there as well. So I can move back a bit. So in this one, you can see that B and D are not connected. So you see that B is in parallel with D and also with C.
Okay, thank you.
Could you please explain one more time what the arc between A and D means? I can't really wrap my hand around it, how something can follow something and the other one is not being followed by it at all.
The arc between A and D?
For example, yeah. And vice versa also, maybe the one from D to G.
So the arrowhead here indicates that A is never preceded by D. So if A and D occur, then it's in that order. So D follows A. The other arrowhead here indicates that D is always preceded by A. So this construct over here, you see that there's a choice. We cannot conclude that A is always followed by D because A might also be followed by C, because there's a choice between C and D. But D is always preceded by A, and so is C. So that's why you get these are slightly different arrowheads that indicate that it is not always, but it's never the other way around. So here it excludes that D precedes A. And this is useful if you have a situation where you have one choice followed by the other. So for instance, if you have a choice between A and B, and that is followed by a choice between C and D, you will not have any always relations. So the response is out of the window, the precedence is out of the window. The only thing that you can do then is use these not precedence and not response relations to indicate there is a kind of an order. So A always comes first and then C. If these two are chosen, then it is A and then followed by C, but never the other way around.
So the arcs are like relative. They're not. They're relative. So A is eventually at some point then followed by D, but not all the time directly.
This does not use the directly follows graph at all. So any edge is eventually.
Okay.
Yes.
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. Basically, my question is, when I have this model, what can I do afterwards? Like, could I do a sort of replay? How could I use it? Could I convert it to a PetriNet? Probably not, right? So that's my question.
Okay. How I use this in the contest, so I developed this to compete in the process discovery contest. For the first contest, I submitted these models. And they still had these multiple edges, and then I got the comment, this is much too cluttered to have multiple edges, help, we do not know what this model is. The second time, I created these log skeletons, and then by hand, I had a look at it, okay, what kind of PetriNet is kind of having the same behavior as this log skeleton. And then I submitted the PetriNet, and that made me win that contest. So, the log skeletons can be used to check whether whether a trace is in the language or not. So it has kind of a good scores on that. For the current instance of the process discovery contest, log skeletons are less handy because in that case, for that contest, you need to compare two traces. And you have to indicate which trace fits better. There is no real replay algorithm for the log skeletons yet, like there is for the alignments that were mentioned by Boudewijn van Dongen yesterday. For the alignments, you have a kind of a score, and then you can rank the score, and okay, the one that scores has the least costs, you would select as the one which would be best fitting. That does not exist for the log skeletons yet, in any case.
Thank you for the talk. I have a more general question, I think, at least maybe to all the presenters. So we have all of these different notations, BPMN, transition systems, Petri nets, different types of automata, and my question is maybe like how, let's say you do the mapping from this notation with the log skeleton to a Petri net, then how do you prove that the mapping is an isomorphism or a bisimulation between the two notations? Is there any standard proof that is like generally accepted, or do you go down to temporal logics or LTS?
No, basically what you then do is you check whether the languages are equivalent. And a question is then what equivalent means. So you
behavior or structure. So that's also a question.
On behavior or structure?
The behavior of the
that's
transition
the language
system.
That's the language. So the traces that can be accepted by the model.
And then the equivalence in different structures. Yeah.
Yeah, but how will you compare the structure of such a model with the structure of a Petri net?
Well, I assume that one arrow in this structure would be a substructure of a Petri net, not just one single arrow in a Petri net.
So there is a kind of a conversion from this model to Petri net, but it will never be a workflow net. It will not be a workflow net. It will not be. There is no definition of soundness if there is no workflow net. So. You can convert this to a Petri net. You can try to replay that. That exists, but it's not really useful, I think. I think Dirk also had a question, Marco.
Just maybe a small addition on what Eric said. So, you see, these constraints have been extracted from traces, right? So the natural semantics that you assign to this is a linear time semantics, as we were discussing yesterday, right? So if you have a linear time semantics, as Eric was saying, you never talk about the structures, right? You could only talk about the structures if you move to branching time logics, which you could do, but then you would need to start not from traces, but from behaviors that are branching time in their essence. So you would need to start from event structures or different ways of representing trace behavior. So it's a very interesting question, but if you stay with this, you cannot move beyond the trace-based comparison. The other thing I just wanted to say that maybe show also that we need more and more to integrate reasoning with mining. You could now use some of the techniques we saw yesterday to answer questions that a user may pose on this model. Like, for example, is it possible to do D and E, or they never coexist? And with recent things that we did on stochastic and probabilities, you could even ask questions about frequencies. So if you know the frequency, as Eric was showing, you can ask them how frequent it is that age is preceded by A. So these are things that do not exist yet, but we now have the machinery to do. So if anybody is interested, you could approach us and discuss.
So perhaps a third answer to a single question. In process mining, we are bound by the event log, and an event log contains traces. So the moment of choice is something that we can, a discovery technique tries to find from an event log, but can never find, or at least never be sure that you found it, because the event log doesn't tell you or doesn't show you when a particular choice was made. So a very short answer to your question is that when we want to show that two formalisms are equivalent, then we typically limit ourselves to languages, so the set of traces. And by the definition I gave yesterday, the log skeleton expresses a set of traces that is in the language of the model, hence it is a process model. So what we typically do, or the most easy proof to show that an algorithm can discover a certain class or anything, is by means of regular languages. So if you can show that your process model, formalism, can express every automaton, every DFA, deterministic finite automaton, then you have shown that you are within the class of regular languages and that you are equivalent to every other process modeling notation that expresses regular languages. That is the basis. There are more. There are languages that go beyond that. For instance, if your PetriNet can have an arbitrary number of tokens in a place, but yeah, typically we show that something is or can express any regular language, and then you're there.
Yeah, so I was thinking about questions, not anymore about my role as session chair, sorry. So yeah, I think we can now conclude this part. You can approach obviously the presenters during the coffee break. Let's have another coffee. I think we need it.